So I am honored and so excited to have you here. You have a really, really robust, bio, but I've also gotten to know you personally, and I've heard you speak to women and support women, and you have a huge heart as well as all this knowledge. So I'm really grateful for you to take the time and talk to our audience today. I want to ask you one quick question before we get into some specifics about like personal training and strength training. What got you on this path? Like, what inspired you to run 40 marathons and that 50K ultramarathon? Like, how did you get here?
That's such a great question, because I think we assume that people who have racked up different kinds of athletic accomplishments were always athletic and it was always easy for them, and just kind of they were genetically made that way. And I was not any of those things. I was always like active and like to move my body, but I was not an athlete in any swim, bike, or run, anything growing up. I learned all of it as an adult. And honestly, that it was just this is one of the things I talk about and why I'm so passionate about spreading this word and making people feel like there's a community and motivating, inspiring by listening, by joining, by being in their presence, because I just happened to, because I was in the fitness industry, be surrounded by people who are like, hey, come do this 5K race with us. I'm like, I'm not a runner. I don't think I can do that. And then, we take all those negative thoughts and we basically just demolish them because we go out and we train and we do these things. Then you're like, oh, wow, maybe I am a runner now. And you just keep setting these little small goals along the way and achieving things. I talk about this a lot, in that, what seems like this huge mountain up here, you have to take all the steps to get up the mountain, and then appreciate the mini wins and appreciate that, good job me when you get to the top. So I think what's really impassioned me is just being able to see and feel the effects of the fitness piece on all aspects of my life, because I became more confident and more just, I could go out and do anything mentality, which seeps over into relationships and work and career choices and all of it, as you know, and I'm sure you talk about all the time.
I do talk about some of those topics all the time, especially with women, relationships and career and family. Like, it comes up and it does seep through. And I love that, you shared, you're just, you're kind of just average about it. It wasn't like this big goal, but the more you leaned into it or fell into it and felt inspired, you just kept, it's like this, it sounds like a snowball effect. And, you look amazing for 50. So happy birthday.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But your energy is high and you're like authenticity, excuse me. It's so real. So I just love that. And that's why I wanted you to be a guest, because I think some women, when they haven't been in really good shape, and I was one of them for years, like I let myself go because I was so focused on my family and the kids and stress, and didn't feel like I had the time. And I never saw myself in a certain way as far as like physical fitness. So it was something that I leaned into more again. And I am finding that I need it more and more. And what you said, a lot of it about mindset, but really the physical part, because I teach and talk a lot about spirituality. We are energy first, we're energy beings, but the reality is we are still in the 3D. We are physical beings, and it's important to maintain like our physical health. Can you share with why it's so important to do that and so critical for women as we age to really maintain our physical health or strengthen our body more?
Well, you've brought up, you are an example of so many women that are out there who have put themselves at the bottom of the to-do list, the bottom of the priority list. They don't work out anymore. And then it just sends you into this cycle of what happens when you don't work out. Well, you don't have as much energy. And when you don't have as much energy, then you stop working, you do even less. And it's just this cycle, right? That just kind of keeps going through. And the less energy and the less you do, the less confidence you have that you could start that back up again. And, we maybe shy away from people who are out there doing it and killing it when it comes to that. And you're like, well, I don't want to be part of that group because they scare me or they're going to judge me. And we just go into this negative spiral, right? So I think as as women in midlife, going 40s and 50s and beyond, it's our time to start to take back our identity and feeling like we are separate from our children, our work, our spouse. Like we have this separate identity. And if we can relate that to, okay, I want to be a strong woman. What does that mean for each person?
Yeah.
And if you start with physical strength, this is what I call the gateway. The fitness is the gateway to happiness, to wellness. It's because if you start with physical strength, it's really easy. It's a tangible thing. Like I'm going to set this physical goal. I want to be able to do 10 push-ups. I want to be able to run a mile. Those are things that you either do it or you don't. It's very easy to know if you accomplished your goal. As opposed to like, well, I want to feel better. What does that mean? Or I want to like have a better relationship. That's harder to maybe put some tangible results with it. And it also takes longer. Physical stuff can actually, honestly, we want some quick wins in life, right?
Yes.
So like setting the fitness goals, small ones in the beginning are quick wins that just gradually build up your confidence over time. When I was like 15 years old, I didn't say, I'm going to do 40 marathons by the time I'm 40. I didn't think I was going to do one marathon my entire life. But because I had accumulated these wins along the way, then when I turned 39, I'm like, hey, I only need to do this many more, and then I can hit this pretty cool next level. So I think that as we get older, and we're looking for, how can we accomplish these fitness goals that we have? Number one thing that I think stops us from doing it is us. Is our negative self-talk. I mean, women, there's some like new study out that shows that women have 36 negative thoughts per day about their body, not even about all the other stuff, but just your body. That's like 13,000 negative thoughts a year. So we have to like first be like aware that we're having those negative thoughts, right? And then we have to disrupt them and reframe them. So how do we do that? We start with going, okay, well, I'm weak. I can't do 10 push-ups. How do we fix that into, okay, I'm not as strong as I'm capable of being. What if I start by trying to do a push-up against the wall? Okay, I'm going to do that. And now I'm going to do maybe push-ups on my knees. And then I'm going to try to do a push-up without being on my knees. And that's the progression of the building the confidence piece. So I think if we can start with those mini goals, like I'm talking about in our midlife, and not be this like, I mean, look, we grew up like, you have to be Wonder Woman. You have to like, cook up the bacon, fry it up in a pan, bring it home, do all this stuff, right? And like, we're realizing that all that accomplished in life is us feeling completely stressed out, burnt out, and unhappy.
Right. So, and inadequate sometimes because we couldn't really do it, right?
Yeah. So instead, if we can build up our confidence again, but not feel like it has to be perfect right away, or we have to be the best right away, to actually like thrive in the place of like, this is hard, but I'm learning. I'm feeling like more energy as I go along. I'm feeling more like capable, and self-worth and self-esteem, all those things, taking the time to recognize them along the way is really important too.
That I agree with that. And that, some of the stuff you shared makes a lot of sense to me, because I feel like I'm looking at my life and my fitness life through the lens of how you're sharing. And one of the things I love that you said was like small goals, right? And that you didn't set out to do all these big things, and chunking it down, because if, whatever age we are, if we set the goal to do 50 marathons or an ultra 50 by the age of 50, but we're still sitting on the couch, I mean, it's overwhelming and we just quit, for one. And then the mindset of how we see ourselves, like affirming in the I am, because I never thought I was someone who could do push-ups. Like I have a weaker upper body, let's say, compared to my lower body. And before the pandemic, I started going back to the gym for about a year, and then the gym's shut down. I'm like, what am I going to do? And someone challenged me to do push-ups. And I was like, I can't do push-ups. I don't do push-ups. And the negative, that negative spiral. And one day, my friend said, it's all mental. You just got to shift it. I can do push-ups, start with 1, start with then 3, then 5, and incrementally. So I got up to 25, and there was a prize waiting at the end. And then I joined a little challenge, like a push-up challenge for something to raise money, but more so for myself. So I started rebuilding those goals and how can I maintain these results that I've done in a different way because I don't have the same facility. And I wanted to ask you about that because sometimes do you find with women or people in general, the mental part of if we can't do it in the way we were doing it, we give up or we don't allow ourselves to shift and, create a new way of doing it. Can you speak to that at all about having to pivot even your physical activity and your mindset to continue on these goals?
Right. I can so relate to what you just asked me because having been very successful as a triathlete and going to the world championships and being that competitive, and then, going into my late 40s and I'm racking up injuries and I am feeling super stressed with life in general and all these things, I started to feel like my performances were not what I could do before. My body was starting to change. I mean, we all have those things where like, what is happening? My fitness and my food is no longer working the way that it used to work. I look different. I feel different. I have more belly fat and I have less energy and all these things, right? So we get caught up in all of that. And what do we do when we go there? We try to push even harder. Okay, I'm just going to do a little more running and a little more this, and I'm going to eat a little bit less. And we do all the things that are absolutely wrong for us that will give us this exact opposite result of what we're looking for. I mean, wasn't it like Dr. Phil that was like, if you keep doing the same thing and you're going to never accomplish what you want to accomplish. I can't get his quote right, but I'm just saying
Einstein says something similar. Yeah,
right. So I think that what's important as we age physically, and we do have different hormonal changes that absolutely 100% impact what we can do. But the good news is we have some really great tools that we are not in general using as women to help dampen the impact of bone loss as we get older, muscle loss as we get older, fat deposits, all of that stuff on top of the mental piece. There's things that we can incorporate. And if we take our goals and we start shifting them to 2 major things that women can do when we start to particularly go into perimenopause and menopause, set goals that are based around heavier strength training.
Okay.
And by heavier, that scares people because they envision these like bulky, huge women throwing weights up over their heads and looking like men. That's not what I'm talking about. Heavier is defined as you can do something like about 6 times, 6 repetitions of squats, 6 repetitions of bench press, things that are multi-muscle groups, multi-compound muscle groups. And those kinds of things will actually change the way that our central nervous system sends out the signals to make up for the fact that we have less and less estrogen in our bodies, which is what's helped keep us healthy and strong in that building phase throughout our life.
Okay.
So since our estrogen is dropping, and we can't do a whole lot about that other than hormone replacement therapy, but as that's dropping, we physically, actually, our bodies do start to break down a little bit more. But the heavy weightlifting actually makes a huge difference in how you can kind of not completely take it away, but it really does improve. And the second thing is high intensity interval training for cardio stuff. So for those listeners who have been endurance cardio junkies like I was forever, and now you're finding like I'm slower and I hurt more and all of these things, and maybe I'm not really motivated anymore, I would highly encourage you to incorporate, not switch over, but incorporate the high intensity training. And that's really high, meaning like you can do it for maybe 30 seconds.
Okay.
And then you go ahead. You have a question.
I was going to ask you to break that down. There,
Okay,
actually.
perfect.
So
So
the hip training, so 30 seconds, like
yeah.
peak intensity, and this is cardio you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
So the new studies that are actually being done on women, finally, because most of our research that women are utilizing is based off of men, usually young, fit men. So the new research is showing that as we go into perimenopause and menopause, our hormones are changing, that we need very high intensity training. They call it SIT, short interval training. So it's kind of a, here's HIIT, it's high interval training. We kind of know that that's like random amounts of time that we do these things, but SIT is 10 to 30 seconds. So that means maximal effort.
Okay.
If you do that right away, maybe you're like, I can't even barely, I feel really low energy, low fitness level right now. You work up to them, right? But the goal is to get to a place where at the 30-second mark, I can't run any faster. I can't swim any harder, any kind of cardiovascular sport that you're doing. So, and then you would recover for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. My kind of rule of thumb that I tell women when they're starting off is take it in 1 minute chunks.
Okay.
For 1 minute, if you can do 10 seconds at that highest level, then you get 50 seconds of recovery time. If you can do 30 seconds, then you can do 30. And it's a progressive overload principle. So say I start with I'm going to start going out and I'm going to try to run. And speed doesn't matter. It's whatever that is relative to you. And that's, I'm going to run as hard as I can. And I can do that for 10 seconds before I feel like I'm going to keel over. So then I'm going to walk for 50 seconds. And I'm going to gradually over time progress to okay, well, now I can run that intensity a little bit longer, 20 seconds or 30 seconds. Once I get to 30 seconds and I can go further, now I have to run faster. I have to take it back to a point where it's harder again, because that's what's going to stimulate. The reason I'm saying this is that's what stimulates your central nervous system to send out all of the stuff into your body that says, yes, this is how we're going to feel more energy. And it really does work. So does that make sense?
It does. And I was like, oh, when I go to the gym later, I'm going to tweak my workout a little based on this conversation.
Yeah. So maybe a thing for people who are gym goers and if you're an elliptical person, because sometimes running is not the best example for people.
Yeah.
You get on the elliptical and you set your settings to the same settings you do for an hour, and you do your hour workout and you get off and you're wondering why you have no changes in your physicality, in your mental, in all of it. So instead, get on the elliptical and just pump that thing as hard as you can for 10 to 30 seconds and then break, right? Like we just talked about, and go easy. And you might be done after 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And instead of thinking, oh, that's not as good because I didn't go as long, you're actually getting more benefits when it comes to your hormonal health and decreasing all of the risks that bump up as we age. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, all those things. This is going to have a greater impact on all of that.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that. I mean, I know because I've been relatively consistent over the last 4 years that I just feel better, but I didn't know all the little bits why. And especially at the age, I'm going to be 54. So the hormones are, whack at this stage of our life. And so I really appreciate that. I hope that, women listening, if they're too hard on themselves or have been afraid of getting going, that these small little incremental goals and the breaks in between are helpful. Because I remember I used to do a lot of Bikram yoga when there was a studio near me. And it's one of the things that was different about it. Instead of flow, it's it's almost like HIIT training, but in a different way. You do a pose, but then you rest, right? In between. And I remember the instructor always saying, the rest is where the healing happens. The rest is where the growth happens. Just like our kids, when we have kids and, they're eating and eating, they're going through those growth stages, but their bodies actually physically grow and expand when they're sleeping. So I love that you brought up rest, because I feel like in this culture of hustle, hustle, go, and especially as women, when we push forward, it one takes us out of our feminine energy. And we think if we're not able to push enough, we're not doing enough. And then that negative spiral happens. So I really appreciate this, like on so many levels. Like it helps the hormones, but it helps the mental and the physical. And it is enough to just do 20 or 30 minutes. And like you said, 10 seconds and a 50-second rest, if that's where you're at, right? Some of the work that I do is like meeting people where they're at. And it sounds like you do exactly that in your work as well. So that's pretty inspiring. I don't know if I'm ever going to run a marathon, but well, I'll tell you what, I have a back injury and running, I'm not going to say mentally I'm not a runner, but it doesn't work for my body. Like you said, I'm more of a stair climber. It works. It helps stretch out my hip. But what I wanted to ask you, one of the questions is, as we age as women, regardless of what modality we choose, are there physical like impacts or injury that women should look out for or be aware of? Or things to avoid as women? I don't know, just as we age, like, are we more prone to physical injury as well?
Well, it's interesting that I love that you brought this up, because often we think we shouldn't do high intensity, whether it's strength training or cardio, because we're going to get hurt. So let's take that piece first. I'm worried about I'm going to get hurt. The research proves that doing the high intensity stuff decreases your risk of injury. It increases your immunity. So we also worry that we're going to maybe get sick, but actually increases your immunity more so than like the long, slow distance, what we call like endurance cardio stuff. Then you have, but the other side is like, I actually have a back issue. I have a slip disc, or I have, ankle issues where I've had maybe some surgeries even. All of that is completely valid. And so you choose the modality that makes sense for your body, right? So maybe an impact activity is not the best for you. And that's okay. We can, impact is important for helping us maintain bone mass, but we can also do that by lifting heavy weights.
Okay.
So like there's workarounds for everything. So if you're like, I'm not a runner, but I really like being on the stair climber. Okay, but how often do you get on the stair climber and like mix it up? Do you like do hard intensity intervals, or do you always kind of go at the same pace or the same incline, some steps go higher? So I think part of it is bringing up the rest piece, which you said is so important. Sometimes it's harder to allow ourselves or give ourselves permission to rest when we're doing that same kind of cardio every day. We feel like we should do more, like I was saying. When you do the high intensity stuff, you're like, damn, that was really hard. I need to rest tomorrow. It's almost like it gives us more of that permission, like I'm saying, to say, yes, it's okay to do something lower level than I'm used to doing. So the kind of the gray zone workouts where I go, I sweat, I work out, but maybe it's good for me, I feel better, but how much better could I feel if I was up here harder, and then in between I'm down here, really letting all of the stress hormones that happen in our bodies just take a break instead of always being kind of sort of stressed all the time. So it really sets that apart.
I love that. And I love that you're sharing that, because like we live in a culture of stress, right? So to have this information, because I feel like there's so much information out there. There's a lot of misinformation. And what you said too, studies were done on younger male bodies, but your clientele, like mine, is like women over 40, women over 50. So we have different issues. And I'm thinking this is why it's so helpful to have a guide or a coach like yourself, if someone wants to start or shift or tweak to really get them, because one, you're a woman, you're 50, and your background in your exercise, like your training and what you do, it like you walk the walk, you walk the talk. And every time I've had the opportunity to engage with you, especially like we used to do some rooms on Clubhouse together, and I've been in rooms, you're always high energy, naturally and authentically. And I'm like, it's part of that because you take good care of your physical health, which makes you more confident, makes you more clear, and your hormones are in check. I mean, you're a walking example of it. So I just love it. And I'm very inspired to tweak my routine. I wanted to ask you a question about endurance. And I love, I had added weights a few years ago off and on, but I'm not like a gym rat. I only go a couple times a week. So is it okay to just go 2 or 3 times a week? You don't have to be there every day. And I get bored and I like to mix it up and I like to be outside. So I walk a lot. Are long walks helpful, or is it personal preference, or does it not get someone the same benefits if they're only doing just walking, for example?
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think I'm going to break it down into a couple portions of what you were asking me. So the first thing you were saying is, basically how many times a week do I need to go to the gym and lift weights?
Yeah.
I would say if you can aim for 2 times a week, full body.
Okay.
So every time you go, you're going to make sure you kind of get all of your muscle groups, and doing that with heavy weights. Let's just start. If you don't strength train at all right now, you shouldn't start by doing heavy weights. You should start by building the foundation of strength in your tendons, your ligaments, and your muscles by doing really good form, making sure that everything is good. And that probably requires hiring a personal trainer, and then getting really good at understanding how to activate the muscles, that your glutes are firing, your shoulder blades are firing, your core, all the areas that tend to not want to fire as easily as our dominant muscle groups.
Mm-hmm.
So we start there, and we start with building that up, and we get to the point where we're like, okay, now I'm lifting a relatively heavy weight that I can do maybe 10 to 15 repetitions of. And I'm doing that for a solid, maybe 3 months. Okay. Now I'm ready to start implementing this heavyweight training that Shannon told me about. Okay, now I'm ready. I'm going to do that once a week and just, start to condition my body to do that. You could still do the other strength training too, because there are benefits. They're just not as big as doing the heavy lifting stuff. So I would start with that's your progression.
Okay.
For the cardio part of what you're asking me, do you like long walks? Is that something I should be doing and all that? And yeah, for sure, because there's benefits beyond the physicality part of going outside and being in nature, or maybe joining your girlfriend and having a chat while you walk, or listening to something motivational. There's all these great other things that have to do with not just the physical part. And then from a physical standpoint, going back to like hard days and easy days, your easy days may be a walk. And that's active recovery, what we call active recovery. So when I say you need to rest, I don't mean you need to lay on the couch and like take a nap for 2 hours. Okay. You just scale it back. Gotcha. So let me just do one more so that this will be understandable for everybody. Okay. We have a hormone called cortisol. Some people are familiar with this. If you ever have been to a naturopath, you've probably heard of this. And cortisol is our flight or fight hormone. Super important that we have it, because we need to be able to run away or fight in those circumstances where, something bad is happening. So cortisol is a good thing. However, other things impact your cortisol besides an immediate danger. That's any kind of mental, emotional stress that you have elevates your cortisol. So let's say you're the average woman who has a job that's stressful, who has perhaps relationships that are stressful, whether it's your marriage, your kids, your family, friends, whatever. We have all these stressors. And now we're taking this exercise that's in this gray zone. It's not up here and it's not down here. It's in this gray zone. And that elevates our cortisol as well. Right. So what we really want to do is avoid exercise being a cortisol, a stressor on those cortisol levels. And we want to even make it so that it actually helps by working out up here or working out down here on a more regular basis. And that's going to, and know also that unfortunately, as we go into perimenopause and menopause, our baseline cortisol levels are higher. Even without all the other, like apples to apples, they're higher. So it's even more important as we go into those phases of life that we're cognizant. Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like, throughout this conversation with you, we've touched on a lot of the mental as we talk about the physical, and it's so important for women to recognize that our bodies change. And I think coming into some acceptance and allowance about that, because we don't want to age, and we live in a culture that doesn't favorably look at aging in women, right? So it's like there's this mental resistance. So, the physical aspect, the physical exercise feels like you can help blow through some of that. I wanted to ask you, aside from the mental, how is it also a portal for women, possibly if they want to grow spiritually? Do you have any thoughts on that before we wrap up?
I do. And I think you just touched on it as well, in that, we think about the mental pieces, like that strong, confident piece that we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. But the spiritual, when I think of spiritual, I think of a sense of calmness and self-acceptance that can often elude us as women, because we're so busy doing and trying to like check these things off of our list. So exercise, again, going back to like, it really allows us a time when it turns our brains off for a little bit. If you're working really hard, I guarantee you are not thinking about like the bills you have to pay, the kids you have to take to school. You're not thinking about that. You're giving yourself that time to just kind of rest your brain, right? And then the more we can rest our brain, it allows us to then, okay, now I'm rested fully, and now I can kind of go into a place of like thinking about maybe things that are more important to you in life than just the daily tasks. Yeah. And when we can focus our energies on what makes us feel better physically, that will make us feel better spiritually, because we feel like we're in this Zen place of just feeling more you, if that makes sense. More that you're in touch with your own physicality, your own mental, and then the spiritual comes along with it.
I love that. And I really appreciate that, because I think for me, part of being spiritual, I mean, we are just spiritual beings, right? Is just being present, and what you said about when we are doing those heavy weights or really focused on that, we're not thinking and we're present. So that for me is a doorway in to presence. And I remember when I started doing less yoga, I mean, I love yoga, but going to do some weights. And I was telling a yoga instructor that I knew that I found it just as mindful, because I would, just like in yoga, the weights are hard for me. Like finding a drishti point on the wall across, so I could just focus on my breath and focus on what I was doing. And as I listened to you talk, I'm remembering times of when the weights were a little heavier, how much more focus I needed, and how more empty my mind was of all the chatter, because I really had to use my breath and my intention and just be with that movement. And that to me is like really being present. So I love that you shared that, because I do think, however we move our body or exercise, there's no right or wrong way. We have to do what works for us. And we shift as we age. And for someone, I like variety. So shifting, it's also, I can't do the same thing over and over and over. And it's harder to stick with movement when I do that. So I love that you talked to in this about the HIIT training, or that you called it, did you call it sit or?
SIT is short interval training. Yes.
Okay. SIT, a little different than HIIT. But really mixing some of these things up, it's important. And I'm finding for myself with things like this that could be new, or if I want to up my game, it's really important to have a guide. So if someone or a woman wants to shift or upgrade or just get a revamp, or someone to look at what they're doing, what should they look for in a coach or a trainer, especially a woman over 40? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I do feel like, especially when we are going into the menopausal part of our lives, if you can have a trainer who is a female, so she understands the changes in our bodies that happen with hormones, and when you feel more energy versus when you feel less energy, and how to work with all of that,
Mhm.
then whether or not she's actually experienced it yet, she's still a woman who kind of gets it, right? You just,
Okay.
on a
Yep.
deeper level, you get it. So I do
Mhm.
think that it is really beneficial to work with a woman, ideally a woman who has really educated herself on the differences in how we can work with our hormones to get the most out of it. Because if you work with someone who's never experienced it or has never worked with people and researched it, they're going to probably do the same stuff that we've always thought was what we should do. High repetitions, light weights, don't lift too heavy, and all these things that are actually not going to help you. So a woman
Okay.
who's really up to date on the latest research, which is showing us that we need to do the things I'm talking about today. And in also like helping you with like the nutrition piece of it a little bit, because we didn't even touch on that today, but that changes as we age too. So a woman who's with that, and then I would say the number, so you've got experience, you've got education, and then the third part is a woman who focuses on the mindset building that comes along with the fitness, because you need both of those things. You can't just always talk about, you know, getting fitter from a physical standpoint only. You have to incorporate how to utilize the power of your brain in both the emotional and the spiritual way to continue to be on this path of health and wellness with your fitness.
I love that. Shannon, I so appreciate you sharing that and sharing things, because you talked about power, and that's kind of what I put in the title of the episode. This is really to help women like own their power and be in their body and feel powerful, but yet still feminine and soft, right? It's just, so working with a woman who gets it is vital. So I appreciate that. We are over the time. I want to ask you, where can women find you if they're inspired to work with you? What's the best place?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called liveyourtruthwomen.com. You can get with me through there. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, both as Live Your Truth Women. You can definitely DM me, email me. I answer everything within about 24 hours, and I do Zoom training a lot still, even though we're past the big shift. I still do a lot of Zoom training. And I do both individual and small group Zoom training, as well as I'm here in Tucson, Arizona, if anybody's in this area.
Well, if I go to Tucson, I will look you up. But I love that you offer Zoom, because you could reach women from all over the world. Any special offer for our listeners today if they hear this?
Yes.
And I'll put it in the show notes as well.
I would love to offer your listeners a free 30-minute Zoom training session. And we can really, don't worry if you're like, I don't want to work out for 30 minutes. If you want to just chat for 30 minutes and talk about goals and how to like kickstart your program, both physically and mentally, that Zoom session can be used in any capacity that you'd like.
Awesome. Very generous. Thank you. Shannon, thank you again for being here. So Live Your Truth Women, look up Shannon, Instagram, Facebook, all the places. I so enjoyed this conversation. I love your energy, your expertise, and your spirit. Like you bring so much to your work. And so I honor you and I thank you. So we will have the replay available on Creatrix TV or catmoulton.com. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye for now, everyone.